Sumaiyyah, as I mentioned, was a community coordinator for Archway services, specializing in policy development, particularly that aims to achieve equitable outcomes for underrepresented groups. Using empathy-led qualitative research, which, my God, we need more of this. So we were doing, this is a bit of a side note, right? But research about mental health and marginalized communities is very important. There is actually currently no research at all about mental health effects for the Muslim community in Vancouver. We hope to work with the Vancouver Foundation on a project about that. Now, collaboration on equity, diversity, education, and services that creates for research awareness on anti-racism and newcomer integration, an amazing human being. We were talking before and we were saying, you have such great vibes. And she was like, no, you have such great vibes. And I was like, wow, what a amazing coincidence. Sumaiyyah, you're first. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Hello, my name is Sumaiyyah Adam. Thank you so much for the organizers of this event for bringing us all together. I think a common theme that we're all seeing is, this overlap in wanting to serve community and really unpack mental health and trauma and the roots of that. So it's really great to, hear the different lenses and how people are trying to achieve that. So Yusuf did say a lot of things that I do, and I wonder, how do I intersect my work, my lived experience with trying to, share something meaningful and tangible that maybe inshallah you guys can take away today and, share it within your own respective communities, or it can serve as a tool in the work that you do. So I thought I'd start with, where I come from and my lived experiences, because the reality is that's the one thing that drives me in my work and my activism. So yeah, like Yusuf said, I'm a Black Muslim woman. I was born and raised in Toronto, and I'm recently moved to Abbotsford last year, which was a bit of a culture shock, growing up in a very multicultural, diverse community my whole life, where it was really easy to identify the people who, look like me, share similar values and customs as me. But, at an early age, my mother would always say, like, what I don't teach you, the world will. And in those moments, I used to think, what are our parents trying to get at by those, sayings? And I felt like now in this, lens of being more mature and grown and, not necessarily in my youth anymore, I realized that was their way of trying to prepare us for the world, prepare us for what we may experience outside of our homes. Ooh, bear with me because I'm a little bit nervous. So yeah, an example of how they prepared us for the outside world was, sending my siblings and I to Kenya for a year, where we studied and we learned and we met a lot of our cousins and aunties and uncles that we didn't know. And so what that opportunity did was, it really educated me on where we came from. And as Norm was talking about how we all have ancestry, we have roots somewhere, maybe beyond Canada. And me going to Kenya for the first time showed me where those roots are, right? It introduced me to systems outside of the Western systems. It also exposed me to a wealth of knowledge, culture, which I'm grateful to have seen, because then it made me feel like, okay, we have, nations beyond Canada. However, within these systems, we often see that there's not a lot of respect and value put on, countries and places that are often not Western-centric and Eurocentric, being in the education system, going through political science and peace studies. I really even saw the separation of language from developed, underdeveloped, global south, global north, always trying to box us and categorize us. And seeing that history instilled the value of my culture, my upbringing, and operating now, going from that at an age of 10 to 13, seeing that, and now situating myself as a Black Muslim girl in the education system, I often experienced Islamophobia. I wore hijab up until I was 13 years old. And what those two identity markers taught me was, on one end, I am a victim of Islamophobia. I've had my hijab pulled off my head. I've been called a turban girl, the inaccurate stereotypes as well, overlapping cultural groups, religious groups. However, in instances where I defended myself in experiencing Islamophobia, I was often seen as a perpetrator, the bully, because there's this extra layer of being black, right? Operating as a black young girl is also fairly different than other communities. And, I'm gonna shout out Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality. It's important in this work because we all have different layers to our identities, whether that's our gender, our religion, who we are. So I feel like I can really go on about, the burdens placed on me with those two identity markers. However, something that now I'm able to do in this work, I do a lot of diversity education, and I'm familiar with young people, young adults, and when I talk to them, it's really shocking to see the overlapping experiences, even having been in that high school position since I was, about 10, 15 years ago, to see that these are instances that are still happening. And so when I think about, going back to my parents and thinking about how they tried to prepare us for the outside world and integrating into these systems, I also knew that, it's very hard for our parents to be raising us in countries that are far different from their own homes. So I will say that it puts a difficulty on both the parent and the child. Like I'm saying, I maneuvered through a system where I had to endure a lot going to school and then going home, not necessarily having the proper tools and understanding to explain these experiences because, racism and discrimination at its core, it starts covertly, right? It starts within the attitudes and perceptions of people, and then that escalates into behavioral conditions of discrimination, right? Where we're seeing people take attitudes and potentially inflicting pain, physical pain onto people. And, today we've talked about trauma in the lens of, addiction, mental health. And I also see racism and discrimination being a very root to trauma and harm because these were perceptions that were placed on me. So in that lens of being a black girl and being considered a bully or a perpetrator or not being able to seek acknowledgement or reparation for being, a young Muslim girl experiencing Islamophobia, I didn't have proper tools. I didn't have proper support from educators. And even within our own youth spaces, there's a lot of, interpersonal hate and discrimination that goes on even amongst us as racialized people. Non-racialized versus racialized, we take stereotypical jokes and we think it's a joke, but it actually creates lasting impressions when, our cultures are being used as a baseline for making fun of someone. So I think that's one of the overarching messages I wanted to say. Racism and discrimination also is a root of trauma and harm. And so some of the ways in which we try to cultivate change in these spaces of unpacking racism and discrimination and talking about the roots of it is, creating spaces where we're embracing our self-identification. Now a lot of my time I'm in spaces with people who really embrace my nationality as an African woman. I've had the privilege of taking, friends who are not racialized to Kenya, to Tanzania, so that they can see firsthand where I come from. And I think it starts there, trying to become a little bit more proximate with the other as opposed to assuming what we're being taught at face value. At the time I was growing up, I was kind of put in a box of accepting what was at face value, certain traditional modes of thinking and practicing, and a lot of it didn't resonate with who I was. However, I was forced to kind of adopt those mentalities and ideas, and it did conflict with my parents, some of my parents' beliefs as well. So understanding that is very important. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you for my choppiness.
Jazakallah, Sumaiyyah, thank you for sharing so passionately and with vulnerability. And we're here with you, and we all support you in the amazing work because we see you giving back. And you're not just sitting at home and you're not saying, "No, I can't do anything." You're saying, "I will change it," right? Going out in the world and making that difference, and that is a beautiful thing. Thank you so much.